So I'm guessing we can start. Tere õhtust kõigile, tere tulemast. Welcome everyone. This discussion will be in English. I hope you have been advised already. So it's a huge pleasure of mine to welcome you all here, because it's not really every day that we have not one, not two, not three, not four. No, exactly four. We have exactly four artists, wonderful artists here to speak about their work. So it's a great privilege of mine to say hi to Mr. Mikael Owunna, Brooke Holm, Mackenzie Calle, and Rhiannon Adam. Sorry if I butchered anyone's name. You can also take a stab at mine. So that's. And my name is Andrei, by the way. I'm happy enough to kind of ask some questions. And the way this will go is I will be asking some questions. I think we'll take maybe 50 minutes for that, and then you're all very much welcome to ask anything you would like. What I am going to say right away is that we're not going to talk so much about the works themselves, because you can take the visual journey here anyway, and there will be curator tours taking place in the next days. What we will be focusing on are the inspirations and the themes that are kind of cross the work of these four artists we have here. And I think the kind of key question that I will be trying to pose is who owns space? And I don't mean it so much in the political or the economic way, but I mean it in the kind of imaginary sense. Who gets to dream about space? Who gets to kind of dream up how we see space and how we view space and what we get from there? So I'm actually going to start with Mikael, because I will try to take this from the past into the future, and your work go back to traditions from hundreds or rather even thousands of years ago. And your work focuses on African cosmology. So in a sense, what is African cosmology and how does it differ from the view we kind of see space in the Western societies?
Great starting question. Hi everyone, my name is Mikael Owunna. My work is on this side, so if you see it when you go around with the starry bodies on them. So what is African cosmology? So a cosmology is a system in which we can understand the formation and birth of the universe. In that same way in which you think about the structure of how the universe was formed is also the structure in which we understand how we live our lives as human beings on the planet. And so it's structured around myths. So like, what is your myth of origin, your myth of creation? But then it also works on multiple levels, because it works on the level of the cosmic level of how the universe comes into being, but also it talks about how we as individuals can step into becoming a divine and step into our own divinity as well. So African cosmologies are very interesting for me, because I think in a contemporary context, there's a lot of debate around, okay, who's going to own space and where, who's going to be making claims on Mars, etc. Whereas African systems for thousands of years have postulated that human beings have an integral connection to the cosmos, that we are the divine lives within us, we are the cosmos lives within us. And so there are also many myths that even speak about Africans flying across space, flying across time, interdimensional travel, beings descending from the Sirius star system who are the ancestors of human beings. And so I think one of the things that I try to do with my work is to push the conversation around the ways in which Africans for thousands of years actually originated the entire basis around which we understand humanity, human beings, the cosmos, and our relationship with these stellar bodies. So I'm not sure if that really answered the question. I know it's a big question to talk about African cosmologies, but I hope that at least gave a bit of an introduction.
You made a very nice introduction that actually goes right into Mackenzie's work, because you posed the question who gets to go into space and who has been able to actually go to space. And I think, Mackenzie, the introduction to your work had this quote in it that NASA shouldn't have sent astronauts, but rather poets to go into space.
That one is for Rhiannon.
That's for Rhiannon.
But applies to mine as well.
But your work really deals with who goes to space. So who is it that has actually seen space, and why have you decided to focus on that topic and making up this whole new space agency?
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Mackenzie Calle, and this is my project behind us, the Gay Space Agency, and I think you should answer almost the second part of this, because I think in some ways Rhiannon was actually my answer, I would say, to this project, or almost the hope in the ending of what I think I saw for this was you. And so now I think reckoning with that is a whole other topic that we can get into. But this project deals with the exclusion of queer people from space, and specifically the astronaut program at NASA. But to date, neither NASA nor any governmental space agency from across the world has ever selected an openly queer astronaut. And so I was really interested in this fact and just started to delve into the archives and see what I could find. And it really started with Sally Ride. So she was the first American female astronaut. That's her picture on the wall right there with kind of the beam of light across her. And what we actually didn't know until she passed away in 2012 was that she had a female partner of 27 years. So in her whole lifetime, she was never out, and she came out in her obituary. And I think it's the question of, would she have flown if she was out? Would she have been selected if she was out? And I wish the answer to all these things was yes, but it absolutely would not be the case. And so she really sacrificed her personal life for the professional in order to fly and in order to inspire so many women across the country and across the world, myself included. And from there, basically then delving into how did we get to this point of exclusion, and why to this date, still in 2025, have we still never selected an openly queer astronaut? And it begins with the start of NASA's space program, where early astronauts in the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo programs were all required to take 2 heterosexuality tests. And so really starting from that foundation, we still see that coming through today. So it's kind of hidden by the speaker, but the green Rorschach test, so that was actually one. And the astronaut candidates were expected to see feminine anatomy in those images to prove their heterosexuality. And then the other test was a personality questionnaire. Basically, it ranked 15 different things. One of them was heterosexuality. And the questions would be like, A, I would like to kiss attractive people of the opposite sex. Or B, I would like to accomplish something of great significance. And you had to pick which one applied to you the most. So yeah, this project has been, I guess, an exploration of the past and the history. But then I was really inspired by a quote from Sally, which was, "You can't be what you can't see." So then that kind of spurred this whole wall behind us that was almost imagining a fictional space agency. And then I met Rhiannon, who was slated to go to space and orbit the moon, and I'll let you take it from there.
Sorry, just before we get to Rhiannon, just a quick follow-up. How much does what you described apply today?
All of it. Yeah, nothing has changed.
Oh, great news.
No, but I think there was a minute when I was working on this, and I thought, we're nowhere close to where we should be. There's still progress. We're moving in that direction. And we've seen now since the Trump presidency, everything has just been so quickly erased. It already was not in a great place, and it's been pushed back even further. Even things of advocating for the first woman on the moon, that has now been scrubbed from NASA's websites.
So now coming to Rhiannon, your story is so fascinating that we could probably discuss it for the whole hour. And in an alternate universe, you would basically might be in space today, but you're here. So can you give us a really quick
Lucky you.
But so what did you kind of take away from what were the kind of key takeaways for you from the whole story, from you actually applying to go to space up until it being cancelled on the very last minute?
Well, I'm not sure it was cancelled on the last minute, because luckily I don't think I would be in space yet, because I was due to be traveling on Starship, which is still in development, and I would not want to be traveling on it right now because, I do value my own life slightly. But, it felt very important for me throughout the process of application that I was very clear about who I was. And I think, as an artist, you often make decisions about how much you want to reveal about yourself and how much you want other people just to experience your work for what it is, or to experience you on face value. And so this project, which you can see to the left here of me, this project, it's really about the fallout from Dear Moon. So Dear Moon was a planned lunar circumnavigation, and it was funded by a man called Yusaku Maezawa, who is a Japanese billionaire. And his plan was to basically bring 8 artists with him on a lunar circumnavigation to create work in order to inspire world peace. And of course, that's a very lofty goal. And I don't make work that's really particularly about conflict, but I think a lot of the work that I make in general is about kind of getting to the root causes of issues and why we think the way we do about certain things. And spaceflight is always, it's always in fiction films, and it's always kind of seen as this impossible dream. We don't dare to dream that any of us could ever be going to space. It seems so ridiculous to ever dream about it. And then if you start to ask yourself, why not? And why not me? And then you start to delve into the reasons, like in Mackenzie's project, it became more and more important for me to be clear about who I was. And mentioning those Rorschach tests, I think what's also interesting about that is that, of course, this was geared towards men looking at female anatomy, whereas it's not asking women in the first place. Of course, women might see female anatomy because we all have it. So, this question is really posed towards men, and the men have always been framed as being the people that go to space. And the earliest narratives about human spaceflight, it was men going to space. Of the 117 billion humans that have ever walked this earth, only 24 white American men have ever gone anywhere near the moon. So the statistics are not on your side if you're a woman, if you're a queer person, if you're a person of color, if you have any mark of difference. And I think what's interesting is when you look at it in the context of, say, when spaceflight really took off, no pun, we're looking at kind of post-World War II, when it was really like saying, okay, all you women, you thought that you had lives and jobs and everything. Well, hey, think again, because the boys are back in town. So there is this kind of idea about this like cultivation of what a hero looks like, which is permeated through literature and culture, and we as artists are constantly writing that future that other people are then iterating and echoing. So I think my project really plays with that idea of like who writes the future, who writes the future, who gets to dream, as you said in the opening, and who gets to kind of inspire the next generation. And I wish that there was more difference, because it would make the world better. I think space will be one of our greatest fears in years to come, in the way that AI is at the tip of everyone's tongue when they talk about what they're afraid of right now. I think space will be one of those things, and we have an opportunity right now to write it, and so we all need to be more engaged with that topic.
So, Brooke, your work deals with comparisons between Earth and Mars. And Mars is kind of one of the themes most discussed in science fiction literature, and there are like dozens of films about colonizing Mars, and now we have actually billionaires trying to colonize Mars. So what do you think this obsession with bringing life to Mars tells us about our life here on Earth at the very moment?
Yeah, it's very interesting because Mars used to look like Earth 3.8 billion years ago. And my project was all about comparing the similarities between Earth and Martian terrain, because they actually do look very similar, and that is just because Mars used to look like Earth. And so I find it fascinating that we're talking about colonizing Mars, and we're talking about going to Mars, a planet that has undergone significant climate change. It is not habitable, yet we're looking to this place to go. And it's a paradox for me of looking to the future, but also at the same time you're looking to the past. And I kind of like seeing that these layers of time compressed through the lenticular printing, where you're looking at a color image of the Earth, and then all of a sudden you move your body, and then you can see the black and white image of Mars. And the change from color to black and white also speaks to this sort of like, it's like a temporal crisis, I think, where it's like we're not really sure which direction we're looking, and we're actually looking in all the directions at once. And that, for me, I see Mars as a projection of an uninhabitable future, and yet Earth is situated in this echo of a place that used to look like us. So for me, I'm just like stuck in this like loop between the two places being so alike, and how we think about it as a speculative counterpart to life on Earth, but I would just be so interested to see how that happens, because we can't fix our own climate change problems here.
From all of the narratives we have about space and kind of colonizing space and going to space and the future of humanity, what are the perspectives or themes or narratives you see we have missing from there? What is most lacking from all of these kind of today's stereotypes about space that we see in technology and in science fiction and so on? What is missing from the picture? Feel free to step in, whoever likes.
I think there's something very important about the fact that the human body cannot yet survive in space for very long periods of time. Astronauts have a lot of issues with their bodies coming back. If you were living on Mars, it's just that the conditions are not for a human body. So I wonder if it will be humans that go. Is it going to be robots? Is it going to be something that can actually just like build this place for the one day humans to go? And that's where I feel like I get really like sci-fi about it. And I'm like, okay, let's speculate.
And do you really want to even do it anyway? I mean, I can't think of anything worse than being alive on Mars, even if we could survive, to be perfectly honest. If someone said, would you rather die or live on Mars? I'd say, take death, thank you very much. I don't want to live
die
in
on the way to Mars,
Yeah,
or
I
die
don't
on
want to live in some dome forevermore and just look at the outside world and go, I can never do it, but I'm in a space. It just sounds like hell on earth. I don't know why we're dreaming about this. It's crazy to me. Exactly. No, but also I think, just diversity in narratives. Like, we still watch, I mean, you must have seen over the last decade how many space movies, and how often are the heroes of those films exactly the same, just over and over and over. It's almost a typecast. I mean, if you're Matt Damon, I mean, you basically can just make a whole career out of just doing space films right now. We just all think he lives on Mars at this point.
I also think demystifying space a little bit. Like, my mom is terrified of space. And I think I've gotten that reaction of I'm really inspired by space, but I've also gotten the reaction of I'm just so scared of it. And I think that there feels like such a barrier to entry for space, because it feels like this ultimate thing that no one is really ever going to go to. And the people that you see doing it are these hero figures. They're put up on a pedestal. They're seen as these kind of perfect iterations of what we should all aspire to be when we're kids on career day. And how can that ever be touched? I mean, there's currently an astronaut who's a Navy SEAL and doctor and lawyer. I mean, all these things, and it's unattainable. And so I think starting to break that down and be like, we are all people. We all have parents. We all came from somewhere. We all grew up. We all went through a lot of these same things, and making it feel a bit more personal and a bit more human, because ultimately that's what this is. It's a space that none of us should be able to inhabit. We should not be able to go physically. And yet, if we are, why not make this something that can be applicable and that we can all feel connected to? And instead, I think it's just there creates such a distance in most of the narratives that we've seen.
Yeah, I would say that the issue that I think the foundational issues that I have is that the entire framework around which space exploration is framed is around extraction and natural resources. I mean, people are like, oh, we want to go to the moon to extract this. We want to go and get this asteroid because it has titanium, it has platinum, it has this. We want to go to Mars to extract it. So it's all about extraction, which I think is a reflection on the capitalist value system from which it emerges. Within African traditions, all of these are deities. The moon is a deity. Mars is a deity. But also, there's no distinction between the deities and us. So when you extract from and damage the moon, you're also extracting from and damaging the maternal, nurturing aspects of your inner self. When you do that to Mars, you're damaging the warrior self within you. So it's also like these deities are part of us, and so why would you go just to damage them? Because you're also damaging yourself as well. And so I think the entire framework around which the goals are situated is a problem, and I think it shows that. I think that's also why I think about why the cosmology is so important, because if you have a different cosmological apparatus, the goal is just completely different. Like, you're going because you're going to be doing certain meditations that connect you to this particular deity in a particular way. Like, that's not, oh, we're going to mine from this space. We're going there to learn something deeper around what it means to be human, because that space is a divinity that can then inform how we then transform and live our lives as individuals, but also as a human species. So there's a whole spiritual quest you could be doing there, but no, it's all about resources. So I think that's the difference in what a cosmology does, and I think that's why I think that particularly indigenous African frameworks can really inform a completely different approach to this entire industry. Because that's why it's called an industry even. It's not about like a spiritual quest or human development. It's about extraction, natural resources, and increasing someone's natural resources more than other people's.
I was trying to imagine Jeff Bezos' face listening to you at the moment. So, but why is space, if we remove kind of the extraction side of it, which is in a sense logical, why is space important? Why is it important for us to even think about and consider space, especially considering probably none of us will never really go there? Maybe one of you will, but probably none of us Estonians will.
I don't know. I think this is, really the point of my project is that you can only go somewhere if you actually imagine yourself being a part of it. I think that's always been the problem, is like unless you can actually imagine yourself being a part of it, you're never going to write that story. Like that's not going to be the story as a filmmaker that you create, or a writer that writes the books that inspired the earliest rocket propulsion engines. Like you're just not going to create that story. And I think that part of definitely with my project, it was about like, I'm this 5'2". I can't even put my feet on the thing. Like you can see, I'm struggling. I'm like this the whole time. Like I don't go to the gym. I'm imperfect in every way. And yet, if there's a chance that someone like me can go, then there's a chance for some other person to go that has something to say. And I think, I've been thinking a lot about just the nature of like the why. And thinking about just the overview effect in general, and about whether we should just send a whole bunch of politicians onto a rocket and just go and have the overview effect and just like have a moment. Well, I don't even want them to not come back. I want them to come back and be better, because otherwise there'll be a new crop of awfulness. Just like take one lot, let them have their little moment of going, wow, we all are actually connected, and then maybe make better decisions. So, but I was thinking a lot about this. Like in most religions, we give the gods the overview effect. Like almost every god has this overview effect of like able to look down on all of us and is like able to see what's going on. And some of them are interventionist gods and some of them are not, but they all have the gift of the overview effect. And then when we look at like who we send to space, we're giving them that power of the gods, the overview effect. But we're also making sure we're choosing people that have got a career and other things to worry about, and they're not just going out there to contemplate or to come up with new ways of thinking, or they have full-time jobs, and their jobs are to basically do science. And so I think we should be broadening the scope and thinking more broadly about who we send and what we value. And if space is a mirror to all of humanity, then what do we want to see in that mirror? I think it's really important to start asking those questions.
I'm already feeling bad, so I'm taking my words back. Estonians will definitely go to space. Hopefully every Estonians will get it.
Someone of Estonian origin is a NASA astronaut, actually.
No, but I mean, space, there's no borders. When you're looking at the overview effect, you're not looking down and seeing what we see on every single map, divided by country, divided by state. We're not seeing any of those divides, and yet we still have those. And so I think space starts down here for us. And that's where access to space, access for people going to space, access to, or even having the hope of space, or even someone who doesn't want to go to space but dreams and uses that as an inspiration to do whatever they want to do. That starts down here, and that's where we need to start changing things, is the jobs, and it's the access, and it's broadening everyone's ability to see themselves almost doing that work here in order to see themselves in the next step in space. And until that changes, but that's where the work starts, is here. And the access is not there. The access is mainly there for Americans, Russians, the Chinese, and very limited beyond that. And so that's where it needs to start broadening and being able to, within those institutions, then why are we just limiting it to still broadly citizens from those countries? And this, I mean, obviously includes me, I'm an American, but it's ridiculous that space should be for the best, and it should be for, not for the best, but it should be for all of us, and we should all be able to see a version of ourselves in space, and that's what it should also be reflected down here, and it's not.
It makes you think, like, who is the best? Like, when you're asking the questions, like, who is the best, and what criteria are we judging people by, and what are we, what list, when you're looking at your work and you're looking at those tests, why does it matter what anyone sees? Why does that matter? It doesn't make any difference whether you can be a good scientist or not.
But then it gets back to the question of why are we going, and then working backwards from there, why are we going? So who are the best of the people who are then going to represent that? And in some ways, I'm curious, even in the decision process for Dear Moon, because you were deemed, in some ways, the best of the artists of the world and the only woman selected for that mission and representing that, which is also a huge burden. And I know we've talked about that, but I think that's also something interesting to looking at is every single person who's selected to go to space, so few people have access. So it is, why are these people being selected? And I think a lot of times there's just a huge X factor to it. But it is someone in a room deeming someone kind of the best.
Or convenient. I think a lot about the Dear Moon selection process, and to give you some background, it was like an open application call, and 1 million people applied for it, and 8 were selected, and I was the only woman. But they did ask me certain questions through the process. They asked me things like, how long are you willing to wait, and how do you feel about death, and do you want children? And I'm like, no. So I don't know how many other women maybe in that selection process did say, yes, I want children, and would that have been a problem? So was I just convenient because I could tick a box and I was a woman and I was a out queer person and I didn't want kids and I was kind of in the right age range with the right level of like achievement? I don't know. Right place, right time. There's so many things that go into this, but I think, what's interesting about looking at kind of space selection from the past is like, what does a nation want to say about itself? And what are the values it's trying to show that it has? And I think with the American space program, just generally, it's like what we want is good white men with strong Christian values that represent American ideals. And that is essentially, magazine. Yeah. And, if you're a woman, you might be lucky and you might get to be the wife. Lucky you get to be the wife. You don't get a name, you're just the wife. So I think, like, historically, you have to look at, like, when you're sending someone out into space, it's like a big billboard of what does our nation, this is the finest, this is the best. And through all these hero tropes, we are saying that this is what we believe the great American hero should be. And the great American hero does not look like me, or in fact, anyone on this panel. That's the truth of the matter, and yet we're the ones here critiquing those systems. And I think it's important that we stand here as cultural critics to say we need to do better and write better stories and write the future together.
So what kind of stems from what you said, Mackenzie, is that who kind of controls the technology also controls everything at the very moment, and I'm guessing that, or I'm seeing that all this debate about space is very much technology focused, and whenever we talk about technology, it's mostly what can we do, not if we should do it or how we should do it. It's mostly like, yeah, we can build this, let's make it happen. So how much belief do you still have in kind of this age of technological advance that we are going through at the moment in terms of space? Do you think it's kind of, in a way, do you still have belief in these technologies, and do you think they're good for humanity, or do you have any kind of objections to these rockets being built for kind of millionaires to go into space?
Many objections. But I think this is exactly what Mikael was talking about with the resources. So I'd be curious to hear more of your thoughts. And then it's like you're the first step then almost to you with looking at now here's the result in some ways of that resource extraction and significantly in future, and what are we going to do to our own planet? So I guess
So I think there's a few levels. I think the first is the space as a technological quest versus a spiritual quest. And I think that so much of what people are drawn to, come from, you kind of think of your earliest memory, is of this connection to something that's bigger than yourself. There's this divinity that you're connecting to, and you see it out there, and then there's this moment of realizing that, or it can come across you where you realize that that divinity is also within you. And so there's this urge to go there. What happens, I think, I also kind of want to touch on the last question around, like, you know, who will go to space? And I think that's one thing you asked, and you said, oh, no Estonians will go to space, or no, these people will go to space. One of the things is that I think it's also important to expand our notion of the human body even. So within African traditions, we don't just have a physical body. I mean, many traditions you have like one physical body, but then you have like 3 spirit bodies, you have 8 spirit bodies. And so you exist on multiple dimensional planes simultaneously. And that the different bodies can travel in different ways that the physical body cannot. And so that one of the things that's understood is that actually, like, we've always been doing space travel, is maybe just not your physical body that's doing it. But that if you actually think about, for example, astral travel, or when you've been in a deep meditative state and you felt like yourself literally leave your body, that is a form of, you know, traveling, space travel. But I think people diminish it because there's so much focus on the physical body within Western cultures. Oh, my physical body did not go there, so I didn't really go there. No, you traveled there. And there was this really fascinating, one of the pieces in there is of a Dogon diviner. Her name was Inikozo. She was from modern-day Mali. In the mid-1950s, she described with deep precision the weight, size, color, and composition of the star Sirius B, which is actually invisible to the human eye. And she did it she would close her eyes and go into deep trance, and then she would travel through the blackness of space to remote view the star. And then 50 years later, those observations were validated by the Hubble Space Telescope. So did her physical body go? No, but she traveled. And so I think it's also about thinking beyond, thinking about who we are as human beings beyond just the physical. And that's why I kind of talk about kind of the cosmology that you're using. So it's like everybody in this room can or maybe has already traveled through space. And so kind of thinking about it in that way to then not put so much on, oh, well, Jeff Bezos can do it. Like, I think we're giving them too much power. Because all of us, I think you mentioned how in certain cultures there's this overlook effect where gods are separated from us. In African traditions, we are also gods. The gods are not out here, the gods are in here. So I think that also doesn't give them the power. We have the power, and that's within us.
I'd imagine Jeff Bezos might say that you just don't have a rocket yourself.
Which is also true. And that's also okay.
But I'm guessing since here in the Western tradition we are used to this more rationalistic way of sensing the world and viewing the world. So how would you I guess what I'm trying to get to is why do you think the spirituality is important, and how would you kind of argue with someone who would say that, hey, this is all like smoke and mirrors, we live in this rational world and the physical things are the ones that we see, and his deities, you can't even kind of say anything about them because they're all made up and so on?
Well, I think Brooke, it'd be good to hear your thoughts, because it's also about what has this quote-unquote rational world in terms of technology led to. Rampant climate change, destruction, just turn on the news. I mean, it's chaotic. And actually, in Igbo cosmology, this is the age of chaos that we're in. It's a whole thing. But yeah, kind of interested in your reflection on that.
I agree. I think like we're not doing well. We have not done well on this planet. What makes us think we're going to do better on another planet? And that does come from more people being involved in the conversation for sure, and definitely less Western culture influences and more African cosmologies. And like, I love the idea of traveling without traveling, like with your physical body, because like I do also believe in the spiritual nature of us as beings, and I like to feel kind of like small in this way, where you don't have to insert yourself into a situation to feel that you're in a situation, and it's more maybe just about an open mind and like opening your mind to more possibilities than just like experiencing the very real and rational and like what I can see in front of my eyes. Because like all religions rely on some kind of faith or like a belief in the spiritual, and like some religions seem to not be that like complicated to believe in for Western societies, and yet the things that you're talking about are not, to me, that much far removed from, just like any kind of spiritual idea. So I don't know where I'm going with this, but yeah, I really love the idea of like going somewhere without physically having to be there.
I mean, Western culture is all just built on hierarchy, though. Everything is hierarchy, whether it's like financial hierarchy or political hierarchy. Like, we love a hierarchy, religious hierarchy. Like, everything is built that way. And it was interesting, like I studied English literature. I didn't do anything to do with photography or art. And I remember studying Milton and Paradise Lost at one point. And it's interesting when you look at Milton. So he has the world, and then he has a line above it, and then that's the heavens, and that's where, God is. And then below that, so that's like straight above the earth, then you have chaos, and then you have hell below chaos. And so Satan has to travel through chaos to reach earth. And I kept staring at that when I was studying, and I was like, I don't think that it's like there's this line. It's like we have a choice between whether it's going to be like heaven or good or chaos, and they kind of coexist at the same time, right? And it's like we just have to decide which path we choose, but we're on this course which is just like creating this hierarchical structure nonstop, which doesn't allow for any kind of plurality of experience. And I think, when you're thinking about spaceflight, it's always like we're looking up. It's always like this kind of godlike move. And actually, sometimes we just need to look sideways at the way that we're developing these things instead of always looking at it in that zone.
Before I'll go to questions from the audience, since it is so kind of technology focused, what do you see as the role of the artist in space exploration and dreaming and thinking about space?
A critic, the person that warns. Like when you think about Earthrise, right? So Bill Anders, there's a picture of me, it's a lenticular image of myself and Bill Anders flipping between. And the guy in that picture, Bill Anders, he was an Apollo 8 astronaut, one of the three that was the part of the first crew that did the first lunar circumnavigation. And he took the Earthrise image, right? Which is the most, reproduced image in human history. And that was an accident. It wasn't really that was the plan of the mission. That isn't what they were going to do. They were looking for landing sites for the moon landings. But actually, one of the most impactful things that they did, apart from find somewhere for the next Apollo missions that were landing to land, and then basically win the Cold War. So it was kind of a ideological war-fighting mission. But actually, the most impactful thing was really the Earthrise image. And that, the next year we had the first Earth Day, Greenpeace was founded, Doctors Without Borders. I mean, where did that name come from? All of these things started because we saw a photograph. And that was an accidental human output, and it was the very visceral human experience of seeing that moment that catalyzed and captured the imagination of the planet back home. And it wasn't that a picture of the moon was the most groundbreaking thing. It was actually a photograph of us that mattered. It was about us seeing ourselves in a new way and seeing ourselves as interconnected and codependent in a way. And we need a new version of that, and I think that it's not going to be exactly the replica of the same photograph. That isn't the way. I think artists have new technologies, new ways of spreading their work. It doesn't have to be in a gallery space like this. We have many ways of experiencing the world now.
It could be in 4K. 8K.
But you can take work out into the world in a way that you couldn't before. There are ways that you can give experiences to people whose bodies can't move and who are trapped in, locked in. You can give people experiences in a way that you couldn't have imagined in the past. So I think the artist is there to look at technology and look at the other possibilities of that technology and dream about other ways of kind of fracturing that technology and making new products and bringing what is out there back home so that we create a better society. I think that's the role of the artist.
Does anyone want to add anything to that?
I think the role of an artist for me is you are always questioning. I think like if you're an artist, if you're not an artist, I still think a lot of people that wouldn't call themselves artists are artists because, you know, we all have questions. We all want to poke holes in things that don't really make sense. We all want to get to the bottom of something. We all, I think an artist's job is to maybe bring awareness, bring a way of communicating to people, like all people, that there's ideas worth thinking about, and whether that's through like an aesthetic means of, you know, lenticulars on a wall or however it is, whether it's like an installation that's a bodily experience or whatever. I think those things can be really powerful for shifting the way people see things and shifting their perspective so that they think about the world differently. And so bringing these things to people's attention is like, it's a privilege, actually. It's a gift to give and be like, hey, I had this idea, what do you think?
Yeah, when you interact with a work of art, the work of art is also interacting with you. And so it also vibrationally shifts you in ways that may almost leave a seed that then can emerge months, years later. And so I think there's this vibration that you can really tap into. You talked about being a critic in terms of shifting perceptions. That is what art can do, because you place that seed within the space and you transform people. And so I think that's one of the great aspirations for being an artist, for myself.
I think for me too, space is almost the ultimate playground for imagination. It's one of the things we have the least answers about, and it gets at the core of who we are as people, all the way to the greatest questions of how the universe was formed. And so I think all in that, it's just basically, here is all of this room to explore and to question and to get to try and shape a story that might interest someone. But at the same time, I think for me, and especially with this project, it's also a means of actually just looking back at the past. It's not in some ways about space. This is actually about queer history. And yes, it is through the context of space, but it is talking about all of these things that people aren't aware of. And I'm a very visual person, obviously. And so if someone's telling me something, I have a hard time understanding it. And that was true even in history class. So for me to get to create work that can almost bring history to life is one of the greatest things. That's, if I could just do that for one person, then my job is done.
So there's been so many deeply interesting thoughts, but now it's up to you to as to which ones we may go more deeply into, because I think we have a microphone already there. So if anyone has a question, just raise your hand and the microphone will come up to you. Please.
Testing. Okay. Thank you, guys. This one goes to Mackenzie. As you came straight from Mars camp to Estonia, could you just share what are the practical details? How does it work? And what was the most surprising takeaway from the 2 weeks, was it?
Yeah, so it was not dying on Mars, as I also don't think after this experience, so I just, a couple days ago, got back. I was living in a Mars simulation for 2 weeks in the Utah desert. It was like pink rolling hills. I mean, it quite literally, I think, looks like some of Brooke's photographs. And so it was very surreal. And I'm a skeptic by nature. I'm a very logical, rational person, and I think I had a lot of questions going into this. I think I thought, it's not going to, is this actually real? Does this actually matter? Is this actually going to help? And what I will say, like, it felt like such an instant shift in mindset that I really wasn't expecting, and it wasn't about the place. It was almost about me and the people around me, and realizing what matters and how can we survive in this place. But should we survive in this place? Why do we need to survive in this place? And we probably should not survive in this place. And I think that I'm still processing what a lot of it was like. I mean, we only had 2 showers in 2 weeks, and ate a lot of freeze-dried food. So physically, it was also really challenging, and I think I'm going to be processing it for a while. But I think ultimately it was it was still about us. It was still about the crew dynamics. It was still about the people and how can we be kind of successful in terms of furthering science. And the purpose of all of this was to study the psychology of long-term space travel. So how, if as humans and kind of deep in the future of space, if we have multiple outposts on the moon and Mars, how can we live and work together effectively? And I think a huge part of that is it's not for the practical reasons. It is for how can we give people access just to see these spaces. Like I was just like sitting there just looking out the window and I'm like, this can't be real, this can't be Earth. And I think when you were saying even the duality of how similar it is to Earth, I'm like, I know in my simulation it's Mars, but it is Earth, but it feels like both. And it's this weird shift in perspective of, in almost the overview effect of needing to protect where we are and how beautiful it is. But I noticed when I was taking pictures too, I was looking for all of the spaces without plants in it because it made it feel like Earth. And it's almost like that's where we're going, is we're automatically just trying to get rid of all of that on Earth the way that we're going. And I'm here actively searching for that in order for it to seem more like Mars. I don't really know anything about, but that was just something I noticed. I don't know if that answers your question, but that was my ramblings from the last 2 weeks.
So any other questions? Feel free to ask anything you would like, even from the topics we didn't cover yet. Does anyone? So I think we have one more hand from there.
Hello. All of you had a lot of similarities, like you've been immersed into the scientific world in order to do your artistic researches. I was wondering, how did you felt like being into the scientific world? Did the artistic and scientific world was in a good collaboration mindset? How does the scientific world welcomes your artistic approach? And what is your output of it? Like, how did you felt that this combination of worlds, which can be sometimes not contradictory, but not on the same goal sometimes. Someone might be more rational, someone might be more poetic, let's say, or to bring a message. What is the greatest output you got from this combination of worlds?
I think that's a really good question. It's not as visible up here, but have been able to work with and photograph a number of astronauts, as well as a number of people who are training to be astronauts. And it's an interesting shift when I also show them the pictures, because they are thinking about it in such a mission-focused way. We have one job to do. We are so focused. It's almost outside of themselves. It's almost like there is no room for error, because there is no error, and everyone is doing their job. And it's so laser focused in an odd way that as soon as you then bring art, it almost then brings in and invites questions, which they don't always want. But at the same time, I think with this project, I've been able to then, for the aspiring astronauts, and especially people who are queer, showing them the pictures of themselves. They've even said it's almost made it feel possible, and it's almost made it feel real now. In terms of the broader community, there's definitely a lot of pushback. They do not want to admit there's issues, and I know this deals more with diversity as opposed to science itself, but I think that gets at the nature of it, because as soon as you invite someone to be themselves within science, they're then seen as subjective. You're not objective anymore, and you're almost taking away your credibility if you're being yourself. Because you're then saying, I am this person, maybe I'm also a flawed person, we're all flawed people, but it's a weird divide where it's almost like this need to be perfect and the need to look and be like the astronauts in order to be good at your job and to be promoted even, in all of these things that we're all dealing with. But there's an odd objectivity that is seen with being less than yourself, I've found. So art then invites the questions, and a lot of people don't necessarily want to see that.
I mean, a lot of my work, which isn't really here, is very rooted in kind of scientific methods. I mean, photography is science. I mean, just at its base level, that's what it is. So, I applied to the Dear Moon project actually using a Polaroid. And Polaroid is interesting for numerous reasons. But there's a Polaroid on the wall over there, and it's a picture of the whole Earth in a round frame, integral Polaroid. And there's just even in the name integral, it's like everything is included within it. And the world is in that picture, and everything that we know and love and every person you've ever met is in that integral Polaroid. Anyway, but the founder of Polaroid, who was a guy called Edwin Land, who has a history in optics, and he helped develop the U-2 spy plane. But what was interesting about him is that he employed a lot of women who were at Smith College, who were art history majors, who helped to develop color film, color instant film. And in fact, it was a woman that had no scientific background who developed the chemistry for color film through a process of experimentation. And I think, he was a rare case because he understood that there was this dialogue of being able to think about things differently and coming up with different and more elegant solutions sometimes, because you have to have someone that just says, hey, what about this? And it's not the process that you would have followed. So I actually think that those two things intermingle really closely. And, it's funny actually, because Polaroid film was used also to assemble the first, when surveyor, so there were 3 kind of like lunar surveyors that went up and took pictures of the moon's surface, and they actually used Polaroid film to assemble in the inside of a piece of a dome. They reassembled what the moon's surface would look like using Polaroid film, and they took the film stills and transferred them onto Polaroid film and then made these kind of mosaics. And so there's always been this and so a woman invented that film that was enabled to do that, and she didn't have any background in science. So actually, when you look at the history of so many scientific inventions, and even rocket science in general, a lot of that came from the pages of science fiction books. And if you look at the naming conventions of rockets or companies, or most of them come from the pages of books. Even the person that designed the spacesuits for SpaceX, he's actually a Hollywood costume designer that had designed the costumes for Iron Man. And then that was made into a real thing. So I don't think that you can ever look at these parts in silos. I think we do, and I think that it's like we're taught to think about things like that. Like even from secondary school, it's like, well, you can't do that if you don't do this subject and this subject and this subject. But the truth is, a person that basically ended up designing SpaceX's spacesuits was not a scientist. And so I think that we need to stop thinking about ourselves in those ways and putting ourselves in those boxes, and I think we will come away with a better product and a better future.
That almost gets to the question of why are we going to space? I'm curious to put so many different people from so many different backgrounds into space, and actually what are we going to find out by having that, as opposed to being so siloed like we are now?
And also, what if you took people that didn't have a task to do? It's so interesting. There's Inspiration 4, right, which was 4 civilian individuals that were going around on Dragon, going around the Earth. And one of them is an artist. And she basically was like, I just didn't have any time to do anything else because I just had so much science to do. So it depends on who your kind of mission leader is as well, because you can only, I think having an existential crisis is actually a really valid thing to happen to you, or having a midlife crisis, which I'm totally having right now, is also quite a valuable life lesson. And I think that you need to kind of give that space and time to have those wobbles. I actually think that you need to have that, because I think that is where, in uncertainty, I think that is where we often have our best and most inspiring ideas, is from failures, from uncertainty, and we need to have space to have those things happen. And as you said, there's no room for failure within kind of a space mission. It's all so much about it being perfect, because there isn't room for error. But why not take some people that don't have a job to do and can actually think about the other part, which is with Earthrise, it was the most important thing that we brought back was a photograph. Why aren't we just having people that are just there to appreciate and look out the window and think what they can produce and plant the seeds for how we write the future together?
That was actually one of my hardest things about this Mars simulation, because I was on an assignment for a media outlet, and so I needed to produce pictures, but I found I was expecting to come into this basically most of the day just being spent taking pictures, and that could not have been farther from the case. It was actually a struggle to find the time to take the pictures, let alone to think about the pictures, let alone to process what do I want to take a picture of, how do I want it, what is the story or message I want to send from this, and even having that time and reflection, it just felt like such a go, 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 and I look back at the day and I'm just like, what did we do? And it's down to the little things even of just like, it takes so much more time to cook. We're cooking from rehydrated food. We're taking care of the crew. We're taking care of the facility. We're answering about an hour and a half of surveys a day. You're trying to sleep. You're trying to do all these things. And all of a sudden, kind of the day was gone. And so I was actually thinking, I was like, oh my gosh, what if when you said that, like, my God, what if I had just had more time to think? And after 2 weeks, you would think it would happen. And it never did, because that was kind of the demands of the mission.
I have all my best ideas usually lying on the sofa staring up at the white ceiling. So it's often not from actually doing anything, and that's where I come up with most of my inspiration. So I'm a big advocate of just staring into space, no pun.
Mine is usually in the shower with the lights off, which maybe is too personal to share, but like it's all the time that I feel the most disconnected from everything. And so on this mission, 2 showers for 3 minutes each was not maybe the most helpful thing.
That would be great. Like, what did you do in space? I stared at the ceiling. So are there any more questions? Do we have anyone else? Don't be afraid. But if not, then what I'd like to conclude with is that, as there has been mentioned already, there are so many kind of stereotypes we have about space and who can be heroes, and we have all those sad Matt Damon or Brad Pitt in space movies and so on. Is there a piece, of course, beyond this exhibition, is there a piece of culture, either literature or film or something that you would recommend for people to see or hear or just go and experience to kind of expand their view on space and what our future could be like?
Go to a place with no light pollution and look up. I don't know.
One of my crew members, there was a small part of the simulation where we actually could be outside without spacesuits on, and one of the people that I was with works in NASA Mission Control, and he actually said, he was like, I have never seen the stars this clear, and we just sat there for about an hour, all silent, and I think that was one of the most impactful things ever. Like Milky Way just full across the sky, yeah. But also Arrival, I love that movie. And October Sky, if anyone hasn't seen that movie. It's Jake Gyllenhaal in the 90s, and he comes from a small West Virginia town, and it's not the most advanced film, but I think as a kid watching it, that for me was kind of the movie that made me think that anything was possible, and that I didn't know at that point I necessarily wanted to do something at space, but it made it feel like I could.
I would say Sun Ra had a film that was done in, I think, 1972. I'm pretty sure it's called Space is the Place.
It's amazing.
Sure. And it is amazing. It's based on this universe where African Americans are trying to escape from the planet, and there's this whole, because of all the racism here, which is like horrible, so we're trying to escape, and there's this whole tension. It's an amazing story, a very, very lots of really interesting dialogue, lots of interesting mythology that comes out of that. So, and it's available on YouTube for free. So I would say go online, look up Sun Ra, Space is the Place. You also see some of his music too, but look for the movie as well. It's amazing.
I second Space is the Place. It's like a fictional job agency, and people are coming up, and anyways, it's brilliant. And also Sun Ra Orchestra, if you ever get to see them, like obviously Sun Ra's not around anymore, but the band still is, and they're incredible. I don't know, go diving, go diving. The other place that we know nothing about really is the ocean. And I think, actually going and seeing what alien creatures live on this earth was really quite mind-boggling. And I grew up on a boat sailing around the world, and I can tell you also, if you ever want a feeling of going into space, just go into the middle of the Atlantic Ocean where you're the only thing and all there is black sea and black sky and you're the only thing at night. That's pretty incredible. Just as that same feeling of awe, of feeling so tiny and insignificant and interconnected, I think that is a major life experience. If you ever get the chance to go, instead of going on an aeroplane, maybe just go on a container ship across the ocean. Experience that once in your life.
I love those recommendations. Thank you so much. Before we finish up, of course, everyone go and see the exhibition who hasn't yet, because it's wonderful. But there's more space to come here in Fotografiska, because tomorrow evening there will be a night shift with open piano, and I think there even might be some artists playing, so you can come and see and hear that at 8 o'clock in the evening tomorrow. And on Saturday, there will be a tour of the exhibition with 7 artists, and it'll be beginning at 1 o'clock. And on Sunday, Fotografiska will be hosting the TEDx Tallinn, and there will be artists speaking there too. So thank you very much, everyone, for coming and listening to this great discussion. And thank you, Rhiannon, Mackenzie, Brooke, and Mikael, for sharing your thoughts. And thank you for the exhibition.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.